Welcome to Changing the Conversation. This podcast explores the mix of diversity, culture and tech innovations in our industry. Join us as we sit down with trailblazers, thought leaders and innovators who are reshaping the landscape of insurance, bringing you stories that redefine the narrative. We are your guide to the evolving landscape of insurance. This is Changing the Conversation, brought to you by Mackay. Hi Glenn, thank you very much for joining me on Changing the Conversation. I've been looking forward to this podcast for a long time, and I'm quite interested to learn from you, I suppose. Do you want to just give a bit of an intro as to who you are and what you do and why you're going to teach me things?
Yes, well, let's see about that. Yes, my name's Glenn Hirchfield. Just to give you a quick potted history about my background, as you can tell from the grey hair, I've been in the market now for quite some time. I started at AIG many moons ago, and they promised me a graduate program to show me the world. I was going to go around to all sorts of different countries. And 2 years in, when I was still stuck in Croydon, I realised that perhaps they had somewhat oversold the notion of this graduate program. So I departed, moved into the broking space. I found myself purely by accident very early on in my career, being asked to go and look at a business that was for sale. And that set in train really the path for the rest of my career. It was purely by accident. I'd like to tell you that it was all part of some great career plan, but that would not be true. I went to see the business, we did the deal, and thereafter, every time a deal came along, they would call me to go and look at it. So that was great. I moved back into working for an insurance company, which I loved, a firm called ACE, now known as Chubb, and looked after the European operations for that business in the accident and health and consumer solutions space. I ran 3 insurance companies in the UK, which sounds far grander than it was. I then set up my own business in 2008, 2009. So for anybody with a long memory, I think we've all tried to eradicate from our brains that particular period, which was quite traumatic for everybody. But I was out there trying to raise money and set up a business. Anyway, we got there. My wife would characterize me as being stubborn. I'd like to say I'm resilient. But we got there, we sold the business. And just after that, I was approached by Apollo Private Equity asking me to help them on the acquisition of Brit Insurance and help them on that transaction. And I'm still an operating partner with Apollo to this day. And in 2011, I set up ALJ as well. I have 3 children, Alexis, Luke and Jack, and that's the not particularly creative inspiration for the company name. So I'm sorry, that was a bit of a long introduction, but that might help set the scene a little bit.
I love that you've used your kids' initials for your for your company name. And actually, my husband had a consultancy business maybe 10 years ago before he went back into employed, and he did the same. Natalie Isabel Oliver, and he was Neo Consulting. So kindred spirits. I love it. How old are your children?
So I have Alexis, who's 29, was a police officer, now a tattoo artist, which perhaps is one of the most radical changes of career path. When the first baby came along, she realised that she could earn more being a tattoo artist than she could a police officer, and have hours to suit. Jack, who's 28, who works at EY, and Luke, who's 16.
Amazing. And I'm going to counter the radical change. I went from immigration lawyer to rugby coach.
Oh, well, yeah, okay. Yeah, you win. You definitely win.
Well, I feel like they're very on par.
Yeah.
So what inspired you in 2011 to go, right, now's the time for my own consultancy practice, and it is consultancy I'm doing, and I'm going to throw all of my X number of years knowledge and M&A into this. What inspired that?
Well, I'd like to tell you it was a kind of a road to Damascus moment and a moment of inspiration. That wouldn't really be true. What happened was that I had a number of friends coming to me who had businesses, who saw that I was involved in that space, asking for advice. And it struck, in fact, it was actually my wife really who said I was involved with helping Apollo with trying to find very, very large businesses that would be for sale. That was really my focus. Most of my friends who've been in the market for a long time have more modest businesses generally. And I started to help them, and then candidly just decided that there would be an opportunity to set up a business to formally help them. And I'd seen a lot of things in the market, some of which I liked, some of which I didn't. And like probably a lot of us, there was a degree of probably bravado, thinking I might be able to do things better. And so that was really the path back in 2011, where we had a lot of ideas that we, frankly, we'd had. It struck me at the time that not a clue whether we'd ever make a penny with doing things a little bit differently. But fast forward to 2024, and we've been very blessed in terms of how the business has progressed from those early days.
Can you tell me a little bit about the things you didn't like and the things you've done differently, and maybe what lessons you've learned over the period of starting from going, I'm not sure if we're going to make a penny, but we're going to do it this way? What sort of things, challenges have you learned?
Yeah, I think before I do that, I think the other thing to say is I want to be really careful about not sort of suggesting that people that do the job that we do in the marketplace are all bad or good. There are some really, really good people in the market. But what I was the recipient of people coming to me when I was working in large firms saying, we've got a business that's for sale. Here's a 500-page dossier. We'd like you to respond as to say whether you'd like to buy it within the next 14 to 28 days. And you're one of 125 other firms. Good luck. That always seemed a somewhat blunt instrument. And at a much softer skill area, that the thing that also struck me, people selling their businesses, there is, I think, a flawed assumption that people are only interested in how much they can get for their business. And it's rarely, if ever, true that that's the primary driver for people. There are so many other things. And that was something that really struck me with my friends when I would chat to them about what they wanted to do. They wanted to preserve the reputation of the firm. They wanted to protect their staff. They wanted their legacy to be protected. They wanted their customers to be protected. Of course, they wanted to get fair value for the company. But the monetary aspect was often mentioned, sometimes almost as an afterthought, behind these other really crucial things. And that really, really struck me. So all of those things compounded were part of the motivation and the genesis for how we thought we might try to do things a little bit differently.
We started pre-recording talking about people being your biggest asset, and people sell people. The personality of a company is really, really important. Can you talk to me about when you're helping a company to maximize their potential, and I'm not necessarily talking about monetary based on what you've just said, what sort of things do you look for in a company, and how do you support them to sort of maximize that?
That's a great question. So first of all, there are hugely identifiable traits and characteristics in every company. Even sometimes it's very funny where people will use the same language, the same type of terms, or even one firm, every executive says entre nous without fail in every conversation. So there are certain things that you see. But I think the key thing, first of all, when we first start to brief a company and we talk to them, what we say is, number one, be yourself. Say things as they are about your business. Because if you do the opposite and try and pretend that you are something that you're not, regrettably, it gets found out. We pay or the buyer pays some very, very talented people to do sort of delving into the firm during due diligence. So it's much, much better. And actually, confidence is a crucial currency as part of selling your business, and confidence of the buyer that you've told them everything germane and material about the firm. So sometimes we will say, listen, if your IT system is horrible and needs replacing, let's say it. And let's not wait to say it. Let's say it right at the get-go. Equally, let's also tell the company about the things that are great about your firm. And one of the things that we probably, with classic British reserve, we feel massively uncomfortable about saying what the positive outlook might be for the firm. One of the things that Apollo taught me is that they love to say to any firm, where can we deploy capital to help you grow? What would you do with a blank check? And that's something that most people in insurance that will be listening to this, they've never had that problem in their careers about thinking about what's the most I could spend. We all generally, what's the least I could spend to get the maximum possible growth. So we spend a lot of time saying to people, tell me the art of the possible in your business. Because, of course, that's what buyers are buying the firm for. They want to understand how they can maximize the value of that firm. It's great fun to do it. And sometimes we get people gazing into the air for a while because it's a question they've never had to really think about. But it's incredibly helpful to us. And we then in turn try to translate that into something coherent to the buyer to say, we're not just looking in the rearview mirror here. We want you to structure a deal for this firm that takes into account where this business is going, not necessarily where it's been.
That's quite interesting in today's world, because the art of the possible is arguably more than it ever has been, with all the different changes going on at the moment. So I imagine it's really exciting. And I did a podcast with Brian Falchuk, and he was saying his outlook is how might we instead of why we can't. So I can see some alignment. I think that's really interesting. When you are a smaller brokerage or MGA and you're preparing for sale, what sort of things should you be looking at? So highlighting the areas that improvement could happen, but what other things? How do you know that your business is in the right zone for sale and there's just a few tweaks here and there that you could do to maximize potential?
That's another great question. Thank you. So our philosophy is that we only take on around about 40 to 50% of businesses that come to us looking to sell. We do a 2 to 3 week evaluation of whether we think the business is in the right place to sell, whether the value that the shareholders are looking for is realistic, whether there are active buyers in that segment, whether perhaps there are foundational or structural challenges that the business has that would prevent them from getting to a sale. We do that evaluation. Sometimes it's just a timing thing. Mm-hmm. When we think we absolutely can, we can see a clear path through to finding a number of our process. We will generally work bilaterally, try and find 2, 3, 4 interested parties, not have a sort of a drift net fishing approach. That's how we think about things. The other critical thing, your question is saying, how do they prepare? Well, we do a really deep dive into the numbers, which we've just spoken about in terms of what has happened. But equally, we ask them to say, what can you do? Think about perhaps if we were able to improve your IT platform. Think about if we were able to bring in more staff. Think about if we were able to bring in more insurer capacity for you. A lot of the buyers, good strategic, finding cash for a firm is easy. Finding a good strategic buyer that fits well culturally, but can help to really turbocharge growth is where good advisory firms will really focus their attention in terms of M&A. And that's what we do. The other thing, we ask our clients to be honest about the state of their firms. The other thing that we say is that please don't go into selling your firm thinking it's going to be easy. There are times when it's horrendous. Due diligence, I was asked by a client just last week, they were talking to another advisory firm who said that due diligence should be relatively straightforward. And I just said, well, look, it may be, but that's never happened. We've closed over 50 transactions now, and every single time it's difficult. It's you're doing 2 jobs at once. You're spinning plates like never before. It's stressful. People are asking you awkward questions that you'd far rather not answer. So preparing for that is really, really important. And that honesty and transparency, I think, is vital. So having people ready for that. It's still tough, however prepared you are. So yeah, I think those things and a combination of those things are how we think about guiding brokers to be thinking about the journey through M&A. And the other thing is, we give them a list of things that they have to, but this is all rather dull stuff, but they have to put a load of things into a data room. So being ready with your historic financials, being ready with your insurer contracts, being ready with your compliance and governance. Brokers living in the regulatory environment they have to operate in generally are really good at doing that. It's just laborious and time consuming, but it's necessary.
One of the things you mentioned was the cultural fit from buyer to seller. I find things like that fascinating because it's so intangible. How do you do it? Is it a gut feel? Is it experience? Is it more than that? Like, how do you do it?
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So I'll be careful about how I say this, but there are certain firms who buy other businesses who still retain what I call a sort of a rather old school fireside chat mentality to how they think about talking to firms that are looking to sell. There are some people that invest an awful lot of time in getting to know the management team of companies that are selling. They are keen to understand about the staff. They're keen to understand about the staff they need to retain. They're keen to understand about what is driving the seller to want to depart. They're keen to understand how long they can retain the key management people. Where we see a seller, where we see those things are equally important, we try and match those two businesses together. Sometimes we'll have somebody that just says, actually, money is right up the top of the charts for me, and I'd really like to get out quickly. And I have a number of staff that will depart, and so in those circumstances, it's actually okay for us to put them to perhaps one of the much larger firms where perhaps some of those softer skills aren't necessarily right at the forefront of the things that they're concerned about. So we try to, and by the way, we don't always get this right. These are things that are, as you've alluded to, these are things that are not scientific, they're more artistic in terms of how we might think about things. But after many, many years of doing it, generally we gravitate to the people, these are the buyers that have the best people skills, that are prepared to invest time often when it won't necessarily lead to a deal. It won't, but they keep coming back time after time, and they're, again, charming, prepared to just spend sometimes hours and hours and hours, and in the end they often give tremendous advice to the firm to say it may not be the right time now, but here's what we would suggest you do to get ready for the future. And those things are frankly incredibly helpful.
Absolutely. And it's again the human side of it, isn't it? It's not looking for a quick buck. It's actually, is this right? Can we support each other mutually? And I think that's really important. If you're a small business, is there a way you can kind of reverse the due diligence process to find the right buyer?
Yeah, there is. I mean, we recommend for all of our clients that they talk to for us, we will, within the first few weeks of signing a mandated contract with a seller, we'll have them talking to buyers immediately, face to face. Once we've narrowed that down to one buyer and going into exclusivity with that buyer, we'll say to the buyer, we'd like you to provide some references for our client, when that's the seller, in order that they can speak to a firm that you've acquired in the past, and find out what the experience was like. And sometimes people say to me, that's rather dangerous. It really isn't, because people know and understand the complexity of what it's like selling a firm. And so finding out, warts and all, exactly what that journey was like. And the firms that aren't comfortable about doing that, in fact, very few, majority of people are. But so yeah, we allow people to just have a conversation with a firm that they've acquired and just finding out. And again, Most of our clients are really concerned about what it was like in terms of, what the first 30 days were like, what the first 90 days were like, what the first year was like. How did you feel after 3 years? Was it the right thing? Did they look after you? Did they honour the contract? Did they try and change your business? All of those sorts of things are absolutely at the forefront of people's minds.
I think that's fabulous because you're evening the playing field. I've got to tell you my business warts and all to see if you want to buy it, but I want to know warts and all what you're like as a buyer. So I think that's a fabulous kind of quid pro quo.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Can you give me any experiences where that might have impacted a sale decision?
Yeah, I can give you I can't name them, but I can. But we had a deal not that long ago where they're in the firm themselves are in a particularly niche sector, and there were some very distinct characteristics to the individuals selling the firm. These are faith-related issues that they had. We had two particular bids on the table. One was a very, very good offer, extremely good offer. The other, still a good offer, but not quite as good as the top offer. My client chose the smaller, lower financial offer because they felt that the company understood all of the dynamics of his firm, all of the soft issues, all of the faith-related issues, all of the way that they try to treat their staff, the way they try to treat their customers, and their outlook generally on life. So, and that's incredibly uplifting when those things happen, because it does rather buck the assumption and the trend that people think that it is only ever going to be the check size that wins and prevails. As I said at the very beginning, that's rarely our experience. So yeah, that was an example of absolutely where those softer things were absolutely at the forefront of how our client thought about their decision.
Well, one of the things that you hear about in the M&A market is sort of mass consolidation. How many more independent brokers are there, etc., etc. What are the challenges to M&A for both buyers and sellers at the moment, and is market restriction one of them?
Yeah, we may have to extend our podcast by about another 3 hours on that question. Look, if you talk to private equity origination people, they'll tell you that there's a dearth of good opportunities to buy in the marketplace. We look quite differently at that. We see things with a glass half full mentality. We see plenty. We are busier than we've ever been. We've had our busiest few months. We have a network of introducers and just a really good stream of opportunity coming at us. The challenges, your question is, so what are the challenges for buyers and sellers? For partly in the insurance space, there's been a contraction of capacity. So for a number of brokers and MGAs, they are having a really challenging time managing their insurance capacity. And therefore, a selling decision at that time can be really, really difficult and challenging. What we would say to those people is the obvious solution, to us at least, is that we find you a buyer that can bring you capacity as well. So as part of them being open with us about the challenges they face, it allows us to try and think about putting together a structure and finding the right type of buyer that would bring capacity and capital, and often a desire to get into a segment that they're not already in. So generally, there will be ways you can work around that. For buyers, yes, you're right that people often say, well, surely with the consolidators and the work they've done, is there anything left to buy? Well, what typically happens is the entrepreneurial flair and zeal and professionalism that allows people to set up a business in the first place. Once they've sold their business, it's amazing how often that 5 years later they come back into the market because they find it quite difficult working in an organization where they're not the boss. Surprise, surprise. And they go again. There will always be a pipeline of opportunity. What we're now seeing is those new opportunities are more characterized by people that are grasping and utilizing and leveraging new technology and setting up a business. And therefore they are quite disruptive and groundbreaking in the offering. So it's a changed offering that they're bringing. So I think there are always grounds for optimism in our marketplace. And above all, perhaps during COVID, what we saw was the insurance market being incredibly resilient and creative in what they did. And I'm optimistic that that will continue to happen. I'm not sure if I completely answered your question, but I hope I at least skirted around it.
You absolutely did. Thank you. I think one of the things that would be really interesting for people listening is to understand whether the changes in technology, changes in appetite have affected kind of how you plan an exit strategy. So how early should you start planning, given how quickly everything's changing at the moment? And what advice would you give to people or entrepreneurs that are hesitant to sell, but they want to, but they believe they can get a higher target if they wait? You know, what's your kind of exit planning for people?
Yeah, again, it's a really, really good, insightful question. I would say to you that if you're thinking about selling your business and but you have a number of internal structural things that you would like to change. For example, you mentioned changing your IT platform. Go and talk to an advisor, an M&A advisor, before you commit to that new technology platform. So a number of the larger consolidators would say, for example, well, we are all on Actress, so we would much prefer you to be on Actress or Applied or OpenGI or SSP or whatever the case may be. So an advisor is likely to say to you, hold fire on that strategic decision. Don't invest hundreds of thousands of pounds, have the turmoil and the upheaval of changing platform, only to find that the buyer is looks at you and says, I would have loved to have purchased your business if only you had been on platform X rather than platform Y. And that would be a pretty soul-destroying moment for you if all the other sort of stars, moon, planets are all aligned, other than the fact that you've made a decision on platform that perhaps isn't appropriate.
Absolutely. What I mean, I can imagine through your years of experience in M&A, and you've mentioned a couple of the softer skills and circumstances where, you know, it's really been the softer skills and the people orientated side of things. That's quite a nice feeling to see coming out the other side. What's your most, if you have one, rewarding experience in all your years, not necessarily as a consultant?
Gosh, well, I think I can actually answer that. We see life-changing amounts of money often going into the hands of people that have lived quite frugally and who have really devoted their entire career to building up something that often money was never ever the objective. Their passion was about wanting to do something that they felt strongly about, wanting to do something perhaps a bit differently. Sometimes it's just not wanting to work for large companies. But the joy on people's face. Now, I said, going back to the point, money is often a long way down the list. However, seeing people who have just been sort of, a check has just come through to them or a bank transfer, having sold their company, where they say, right, I'm going to pay off the mortgage. I can now afford to perhaps consider a different university for my child or a different school, or I can help my parents buy a house, or I can perhaps help the third sector in terms of charities and make huge impact in other people's lives. Those are the things that really, really make our job worthwhile, and we have a huge smile on our face when we see that happening. And it's not just the shareholders that can be impactful to. That can often be really impactful for staff that within the firms that are being acquired, where they have long-term incentive plans or other types of plans where the departing shareholders will make sometimes really generous gestures, again, life-changing gestures to people, that's wonderful to see. And it's a fairly common thing for us. So yeah, we we always have a big smile every time we see that, and that definitely, we love doing what we do anyway, but that is absolutely icing on the cake for us.
I think that's incredible. It shows how much good there is in humanity, shall we say?
Yes, I agree. I
Um,
agree.
I think for a kind of final wrap up, that would be really interesting is if you could, if you think most of the people listening to this podcast might be brokers, might be people running small businesses, might be people thinking about running small businesses. Um, what advice would you give about their next steps now? Top three things. I'm thinking about changing my life, changing my business. What would you say?
Yeah, okay. So we have had situations before where people have gone into this process without an advisor. So I would always tell people to find an advisor. Um, we've touched upon already the fact that a good advisor will say to you, um, let's just not focus on where you are today. We get a lot of people so that come to us and they say, I just want to reach this target in the future. I want to get to 1 million of profit, or 20 million of premium, or 25 million. And we try to be really gentle with that and say, actually, you don't need to. And there's always this puzzled look to say, why don't I? And say, well, because we can find a buyer that will buy your business based upon your future projections and structure something that will actually reward you for what you're about to achieve. And therefore, don't think that there's this mythical number that you have to attain before you enter into that process. We try and do that really gently, because for some people, it's just something they want to achieve anyway, and they won't be satisfied until they've got there. In which case, we say, fine, we'll talk to you in 6 months or 12 months. But the market is fragile. The market is challenging. When the wind changes direction, insurers will often have a different view about which brokers or MGAs they will support. So we'll say to people, timing is everything with these things. And if you can see a clear pathway through to finding a really good strategic buyer that will help you grow. So this is the thing we haven't probably covered as much as I perhaps should have done, where a lot of the buyers that are out there not only will offer a good price for the business, but they will help grow the business for the next 3 to 5 years, whilst the seller is in the earn-out stage. And that's something that we will sit with people and explain to them. We've touched upon the fact that get on your full body armor and be ready for due diligence and what that looks like. Be ready for the fact it's difficult and challenging and stressful, but equally paint some pictures for people. We try, and all of the sort of the good advisors out there will, painting pictures for what life might be like afterwards. The other thing is around that so many people are keen to, in a challenging market, to de-risk and perhaps be thinking about a little more quality time with family, where they're not doing 18, 20-hour days, which we see regularly. So having a good advisor, thinking through all of the upside for what's available, being open, being honest, articulating everything that's really, I think I would say to you, to a seller, tell me the 5 things that are driving this decision, or the 10 things. And as we alluded to, touched upon earlier, most of the top 5 will be personal and softer issues. And a good advisor will really listen and tune into that, and put you around the table with people that will be sensitive and understand those things that are driving that. And that generally leads to a very good outcome for everybody.
Absolutely. Really interesting. Are you happy that I put your contact details in the show notes to this episode? So if anybody wants to reach out and have a conversation
Of course.
about what it might look like for them,
Yeah.
then they can do. I think that would be
Yeah.
brilliant. I really find this area of business fascinating, because it is as much the artistic as it is the scientific, to quote you from earlier on in the conversation. And I find that fascinating. So I'm really grateful to you for your time and your expertise this morning. Thank you very much.
Oh, bless you. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you for tuning in to another enlightening episode of Changing the Conversation. If you enjoyed today's insights and want to stay connected with the latest industry trends, be sure to subscribe, rate and leave a review. Feel free to reach out to us on social media or through our website to share your thoughts and suggestions, or even to nominate someone whose contribution deserves to be heard. Until next time, this is Sarah Myerscough signing off from Changing the Conversation.